So, yesterday's recording didn't come out, and therefore I'm going to have to re-record it, but we'll move on, okay? So, we saw yesterday really interesting, at least I think so, the Chazon Ish, not the Chazon Ish that everybody quotes at the beginning of Yeridea, but the Chazon Ish a bit later on, where he seems to revise or be prepared to accept, not like Reb Chaim, that if somebody accepts in principle the Yesodus of Emunah, but still makes a mistake based on, he doesn't actually really say here, but he says, Efshar the Rambam Moide, that somebody shaloi ian ulvavoy sholem b'chol hamosor. In other words, somebody that in principle accepts the authenticity and the truth of Torah as it is understood and lived and practiced in orthodoxy, I suppose we should say. He knows there's one Rebbeinu Shalom and he created everything and there's no other, but he still thinks on the basis of some mistake that it is possible for Hashem for Hagshama, corporeality. He is Ki Yisrael kosher v'toiv. And he also added, the Chazon Ish added very interestingly, that when the Raavad wrote Gedolim v'toivim mimenu means from amongst us. That's what we saw. That was the Chazon Ish in Yeridea Siman Samach Beis. And we also then saw the Pirush HaMishnayos in Chulin with the addition that Rav Kafich puts in, the addition that the Rambam wrote later in life, which is, I will just quickly read it again. This is source 10. Avalelu shenoildu b'deyeseilu v'chunchu al pian arein ka'anusim v'dinom dintinik shenishbelu bein hagoyim shekol aveiros of shgoga. And this was on the basis of something else that he wrote later in life. Fine. We move on today, and I am actually going to miss out some. Hold on a second. Yes.
Yeah, I got it twice because we got updated versions.
That's why I printed out the. In fact, if you don't mind giving me one of those, please. Thank you. Make sure that we're all literally on the same page. Okay. I'm going to miss out some bits and pieces, although there's the Barbanel, the Sefer Ikrim. I'm going to go to source 12, at least it was in this one, unless I've messed it up, which is a Michtav Mehagon Agon Rabbi Yisrael Eli Weintraub Zatzal. Yes? You have it?
Yes.
Okay. Okay. Now, this is a letter. First of all, I don't know whether have you heard of Rabbi Yisrael Eli Weintraub?
Yeah.
Yes, you have.
I mean,
you've heard of him.
They have a series of children.
Okay, so let me tell you a little bit about him. He was undoubtedly not just an immense Talmud Chacham in Nigla, and having learnt in the Kol Chazon Ish his whole life, and being very close to the Chazon Ish, the Steipler, etc. I had the zchus of meeting him, having the privilege of asking him a few questions on one or two occasions. But he was, in his life at least, he wasn't that well known outside of certain circles. But if one may say such a thing, perhaps his main gadlus was his familiarity and his many Sfarim, which are now being printed on Sfarim like the Vilna Gaon on Sifra Ditznius, Tikunei Zohar, and his Leshem, Mon Kabbalah in the world of Kabbalah, and the writing, mainly the writings of the Vilna Gaon, but also like I say, the Leshem and others, and his clarity. So he brought Lithuanian style clarity to sugyas in Kabbalah, and but he was a massive Talmud Chacham Benigla. You can't be one without the other, obviously. And he wrote a letter here. This letter is dated 1991, and because it's directly relevant to what we're discussing, I want to rush through it. Okay? So he says as follows. He's writing, he says that he received a certain sefer, and for reasons that will become obvious, he does not say what the sefer is. And as I was going through it, he said, I found dvarim tmuhim kfi shenimsru sham ub'shem mitzukei tevel zatzal asher beis Yisrael nishan aleim. In other words, he is going to spell out for us that he believes that the person who was mitzatet, he cited the opinion of Reb Chaim Brisker as the Nebuchadnezzar Apikoros has done so incorrectly. And that, because I find this is a fascinating contemporary insight into what Reb Chaim said or meant, let's see what he says. Kafisha nimsru hadvarim sham to Aleph. You got to follow with. Kafisha nimsru hadvarim sham yetzer shemisha nela mimena echad ma'yud gimel ekrim. The way that the matter was handed over there, it is given over in such a way that if somebody is literally, it's hidden from him, he's unaware of, or he does not subscribe to one of the 13 ikrim, even in a way that he never thought about this. Hu apikoros. This is the way that the sefer that he is critiquing gives it over. V'noyeg by kol mashakos v'rambam seif hayud gimel ikrim, and the application is that such a person is subject to everything the Rambam wrote. In other words, we're not allowed to love him even, etc., etc. And this person has written himself out of Klal Yisrael. And the way that the Sefer brings it down is that this applies to somebody who possibly never in their lives even thought about the Yud Gimel Ikrim. Al oifen zeh mos hadivrei hagrach zatzal tzibur. And this is the context within which this particular sefer handed over, as it were, gave over the opinion of Reb Chaim to the tzibur. Before I even get into the words of the grach, he says, Hofach rachmona litzlon kimat kol yaldei Yisrael shehigiu lichlal chiyuv mitzvahs la'apikorsim rachmona litzlon. He says the first thing that this mechaber has done is a terrible disservice, and something which is the outcome of what this person has done is his understanding of Reb Chaim now says to us that every Jewish child, I guarantee you, there will be many within frum circles, a Tmimas Dika Bar Mitzvah Bocharel, who's never really given much thought. He knows there's only one Hashem, but there's a bunch of stuff contained within the Yom Gimel Ikrim that he may well not be aware of at all. So he says, what you've done is you have turned Kimat Kol Yaldei Yisrael, you've turned them into apikorsim. They were not taught it, and they never thought about it. In parentheses, I want to add, I have actually seen I didn't bring it in the sources because as I'm going through this, I'm realizing more and more this could go on for a long time. Don't worry, it won't. I'm going to finish this aspect this week and start the Yud Gimel Ikrim. But even taking into account the distinction I made yesterday, the broad sugya of Tinuk Shenishba and the smaller, more specific and particular sugya of Tinuk Shenishba in Yonim of Emunah, even that itself is a massive, it's much bigger than I realized as I began to research it, and therefore I'm not going to bring everything, but I'm just going to quickly quote to you. There was a very great Talmud Chacham in Bnei Brak who you may not have heard of, Moshe Mordechai Schulzinger, Mishmar Halevi, an incredible Talmud Chacham, wrote many Sfarim and quite well known in certain circles. Anyway, when he talks about this topic in one of his Sfarim, and he says, therefore, he draws the opposite conclusion. He says, therefore, it is incumbent, based on Reb Chaim, he takes Reb Chaim at face value, and he says, therefore, it's incumbent on our chadorim in Bnei Brak and our schools to teach our kids before they are bar and bas mitzvah the Yud Gimel Ikrim, so that they're not apikorsim. So he flips it around. I'm just stating. So it's a contemporary of Rabbi Yisrael Elias, and he kind of took the opposite conclusion. Just for the sake of honesty, I'm suggesting this. So, we're talking about our tzoyin kadoshim, our heilige Shepselach. I would say in Yiddish. They're sitting and learning Yom V'Layla. Every 14-year-old boy, every 13-year-old boy in the Bnei Brak doesn't chas v'shalom learn any limudei chayil chas v'shalom. They are sitting and learning Gemara, Rashi, and Tosfos all day. They're in Yeshiva Ketana, and basically you've turned them this Mechaber Sefer by quoting Reb Chaim and taking them at face value, you've basically turned them all into apikorsim. And that's not something that Rabbi Yisrael is prepared to countenance. Zehu uvda mora hayotzes mehatzior hanimsor sham. Fascinating. Nom, it is true. This is not what Reb Chaim meant, says Rabbi Yisrael. Who arrived al Rambam? The Raavad was trying to, Reb Chaim was trying to answer the Raavad's question on the Rambam. I'll summarize it for you. Actually, it's going to say it himself. You'll see his approach. His approach is analytical. It's Lithuanian in that sense, because he was, this is Koil Chazanish speaking. But he says, the Raavad is talking about somebody who sat down, thought about it, learned, and drew the wrong conclusion. On that, the Rambam said such a person is a kaifer, and the Raavad says, no, he isn't. Al Zeh Omar, Reb Chaim said, to answer the Raavad's question on the Rambam, somebody who in course of his learning and research, and as a result of his learning, he ends up with Yesod Echad, Hipuch Echad Me'ikarim, who are Nikru Kofa. Ki Harei Yudi Osoi, Sosar Echad Mehem. Now, his knowledge contradicts one of the Yud Gimel Ikrim. That is the Kofa. Hagabatzmacha. Misha Yotzeloi Mili Mudoi. Somebody who's learning, and his outcome is that Tfilin She'ein Tfilin Tzrichen Ribua. If somebody learns the Sugi of Menachos, he learns the Sugi of Tfilin, and he ends up with the conclusion that it's perfectly okay to have round Tfilin. They don't need to be square. Harry Ein Zednit and Kakofa. Such a person, of course, is not going to. You want to help him out there? Where he is? We are 12. 12.
Next page.
We're on the net. Yeah.
Never mind.
Okay. Please give me what you've got, and I'll. Here we go. No. If you. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, where's the? Yeah. Sorry.
Because there's multiple.
Okay.
There's
Okay.
online.
So how come they have it?
I don't know. I have I just gathered everything I have, and I just.
Okay. No, but. So,
for now, with
okay,
this
I'm sorry. I don't know why. I apologize. I don't know why. Fine. Okay. Thank you. So, if somebody comes to the conclusion that, as a result of learning, that tefillin are okay to be round, ein tefillin trichen ribua, Harry ein zen nidon kekaifer. Of course, such a person, we wouldn't call him a kaifer. He's not a kaifer, rak mishatar b'limudai, right? He made a mistake. I mean, it's a disastrous mistake, and if he, it's wrong. Aval b'chi gavna. The difference is when you're talking about the Yud Gimel Ikrim, ending up with a mistaken conclusion in the Yud Gimel Ikrim, the result is disastrous because you become a kaifer. That's what the Reb Chaim was talking about. That's what the Raavad was talking about. Here's the lomdas. You want the literature lomdas? You need a maisa kfira.
Yeah.
You have to actively. There has to be a ma'asev kfira. You've got to do an action. Doesn't mean an action. You don't do anything. But you've got to. The ma'asev kfira is sitting, learning, ending up with the wrong conclusion, and as a result of your learning, you now deny. But just not knowing, that's not what we're talking about. That's what the Grach is talking about. That ending up with the wrong conclusion as a result of your learning, that makes you a kaifer. Shenis, secondly, adayan inyan im yisma mea chakeloi. Okay, so I'm going to miss this out. Because I want to move on. Oid shalu chazal. Okay, I'm not going to do the rest. This is the key point. The key point here is, let me just see, you want to jump in with pleasure? Just give me a second. Let's just finish this off. So, somebody who, just a second. What Reb Chaim was speaking about was to answer the Raavad's question on the Rambam, that people who learnt wrong pshat through a Targum or through a Rashi, doesn't matter what, through a Medrash, and they end up with the wrong conclusion, then Reb Chaim said that the Rambam's opinion doesn't matter. You're an apikoros at the end of the day. But if you just have never learnt something, but in broad terms, you accept Torah, but you just never thought about it, that Reb Chaim was not talking about that at all. That is what I wanted to take out of it. That is the letter. Yes?
Never mind.
Sure? Okay.
Yeah.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Now, let's move on. And this, I think, hopefully you do have source 13, the Moreh Nevuchim.
Yeah.
Hopefully. Yeah? Yeah, we're good?
Yeah.
Yeah. We're good? Let's go. Okay. So, this is where we end up with a little bit of a spanner in the works yet again. Okay? So we have learnt a number of Rambams. We've seen the Rambam in Pirush HaMishnayos, in Sanhedrin, which is where he talks about the Yud Gimel Ikrim, and in Chulin with the addition that we saw yesterday. We've seen a Rambam in Hilchos Shchita, Mamrim, and Tshuva. There are others, but I've left them out. And now we're going to learn another Rambam, and I'm just going to read and translate. This is in Moreh Nevuchim, and I'm going to ask you what you think. Okay? V'da. The Rambam, let me give you an introduction. The Rambam, the Moreh Nevuchim is divided into three parts. I don't know how much familiarity you have with it. Moreh Nevuchim is divided into three parts. And many, I forget the exact number, but I think I don't want to give a number. But here we're up to Chelek Aleph Perek Lamed Vav. And what he's doing in Chelek Aleph here, he is pointing out what correct beliefs are and acceptable beliefs are, and what are not. He does something really interesting in Perek Mem Vav, where he explains why the Torah talks about Hashem as in simple terms. Dibra Torah Koloshon B'nei Adam. The Torah talks and uses anthropomorphic terms. It uses terms that Hashem is an Ishmael Chama, and he has a hand, and he writes and he defends it, and he says the pshat is because the Torah has to be written in such a way that it is understandable by the simple person. And therefore it's written in terms that they need to understand it. Despite the fact there is an inherent danger in that, because people can walk away and say corporeality.
They take the risk because it's so valuable to reach this person.
Kind of. You'd have to see this inside. Yeah, okay. That's Chelek Aleph Perek Mem Vav, but that's the broad thing, which, by the way, in itself is a very powerful argument to suggest that it's difficult to accept that if Reb Chaim is right at in the simplest and most stark terms, unlike what Rabbi Yisrael Eli is saying, that somebody who ends up with a mistaken belief through no fault of their own, or through an incorrect reading, that they are a kofar, so the Torah is playing a very dangerous game then, is it not? And if you think about the risk-reward, so the Torah, the Rambam defends Hashem, so to speak, in the Torah by saying the reason he wrote the Torah in anthropomorphic terms, even though there is a possibility of things going off the rails and people ending up with the wrong conclusion, is because, so that we should reach the people, start them off. It sounds very much like, and again, I didn't even bring it here because I don't have time. Start them off, so that they speak in a language, Dibra Torah Koloshon B'nei Adam, but of course that you have to then mature and end up with a more sophisticated thing. But if at that point in time you are a proper kofar, it's very difficult to accept that the Rambam is telling me that the Torah is quite okay with us being many, the simple people in Klal Yisrael being a kofar, until they arrive, hopefully, at a more sophisticated and correct thing. We'll write them off as a kofar sort of in the short term. It's very difficult to accept that. What did you want to say?
No, I just want to say that it seems, I assume that there is aspects in Torah which are could be more dangerous than just the anthropomorphic.
Go on, you want to suggest? I don't know, I mean...
No, I'm saying, just with the example, I don't know if this is just the epitome example and that's it. Like, that there will always be things in Torah which can be flipped into a agenda or something, which are always potentially
there are things, but if I'm not sure I understand what you're saying, because if point that I'm trying to make is, based on the Rambam in Chelik Aleph Perek Mem Vav, where he defends that the Rebbeinu Shalom writes, the Torah describes Hashem's in terms where there is a big danger. The Torah time and time and time again, but the reason is so that we reach the Amcha, we start them off, they buy that, and then, so to speak, we move on to a correct interpretation. The Torah is doing that deliberately. The Torah is deliberately, that's the point. But so therefore, I'm just throwing in a comment, which I've seen as I'm sorry, that the Torah should do so deliberately. If the consequence of that in the short term is that they are apikorsim, if Reb Chaim is right, that is almost impossible to countenance. It's a problem. Mm-hmm. However,
is there a Rambam also that says that obviously one shouldn't take those anthropomorphisms as on face value or however you say this. However, that's like a progression. Like that's exactly
what I was quoting. Chelik Aleph Perek Mem Vav. That is what I'm quoting.
And that kids believe it, and they have to start like you have to start with fear, with yira, and then you graduate.
I'm not sure if he mentions Ketanim there. He might do, could be, but yeah. But that I'm not.
Meaning just that by that we can see that there is a certain point in time, whether it's age related or cognitive related, where taking it
where it's not
more not on the very literal side, but more on the like superficial side is okay. That's
but the question on that is that is what he says. That's exactly what I quoted. The problem with that is that if Reb Chaim is right, so to speak, in the Das Rambam, it is almost impossible to accept that, because then what he's saying is that the Torah deliberately and it set out to sell apikorsus with the answer that this is what we have to do short term. That's just not. I can't accept that. I find that's almost impossible to countenance. If you understand. You are right, that's what he says. But if the consequence of that is that the Torah is therefore to say, it's tantamount to saying that the Torah would deliberately deceive Noshim, Ktanim, whoever, simple people, and make them apikorasim in the hope that maybe they'll become more sophisticated. That is perverse, that is malicious. It's one thing to say, Tzadikim Yisharim Darche Hashem, Tzadikim Yelchu Bam U'Poshim Yikoshlu Bam. We find that. We find many times in the Torah where there is a pshat, a simple pshat, people might be able to turn it round. I mean, the first one is Nase Odam. Rashi brings it there immediately. So Hashem was Limda Torah Derech Eretz. The Torah teaches us Derech Eretz, that you consult with the Malachim, even though people could say, you see, he's not in charge. The Torah is happy to teach us that. But that is because the Torah, there is a positive reason to do it, and it is possible some people might take it the wrong way. Here, this is not some people will take it the wrong way. He's saying the Torah deliberately wrote it in terms, it's deliberately. That's what he writes in, and that's the problem. That's what I have a problem with. Okay, we're getting a little bit into the nitty-gritty.
A lot of mistakes might be also very valuable for the learning itself. So you have certain things which probably might be, so to speak, intentionally by the Torah being, so to speak, apikoros typey, just for people. You'd have
to bring proof to that.
I'm saying exactly like the anthropomorph stuff. For example,
but there the problem is if Reb Chaim is the Rambam writes that. The question is, we're finding it difficult to accept that because then it means
do it the opposite way. I see that it's not something dangerous, but something which is, so to speak, a challenge to your.
It turns you into an apikoros. The Torah deliberately wanted you to be an apikoros.
If you define it,
that's Reb Chaim. That's the point. That's the question. Yeah, okay. If Reb Chaim.